We're going to jump into our next session here, which is the evolution of podcasting. We have a great session here. We have 4 of my favorites. We have Karen Woody. She's a professor of law at Washington and Lee University. She is a professor. Her scholarship focuses on security law, financial regulation, and she is on 4 different podcasts: The Woody Report, Everything Compliance, Classroom Insiders, and Succession, the final season. Michael DeBernardis will be joining us here in a quick second. He's a partner at Hughes, Hubbard & Reed, and he's a co-chair of the firm's investigation, enforcement, and compliance practice, and was one of 4 rising stars by Law 360. That's phenomenal. He is on 2 different podcasts, The Corruption Files and All Things Investigations. Michael Volkov is CEO of the Volkov Law Group. He specializes in ethics and compliance. Everybody knows Michael. He is one of the most famous practitioners in our space. He focuses on white-collar defense, government investigations, and internal investigations. He regularly assists clients with FCPA, bribery, AML, OFAC, everything you can imagine. And he's on 3 different podcasts: Why a Duck, original member of the Everything Compliance podcast, and Corruption, Crime, and Compliance. And finally, we have the one and only Matt Kelly, the coolest guy in compliance. He is the CEO and editor of my favorite blog, Radical Compliance, that is required reading for everybody in my company. And he is a frequent host of the Ethics Verse. He speaks on compliance, governance, and risk topics frequently. And he is on 3 different podcasts: the Radical Compliance podcast, Everything Compliance as a founding member and panelist, and Compliance Into the Weeds as a co-founder. How's everybody doing today?
Good.
Great. Thanks for having us.
So as we're waiting for the other 2 gentlemen to join us, I want to start talking a little bit about the evolution of podcasting. You guys are podcast experts, and I really just want to start talking about the early days. How did you get into this game? What was your story on? At one point, you weren't a podcaster, and now you are some of the most famous podcasters in our space. What was your story coming into this? Why don't we start with you, Karen?
I was actually going to throw it to Tom because my answer is entirely Tom Fox. Truly, I mean, that is the reason I'm here. He is who dragged me into this, even when I wasn't all that sure about what it was or if anyone was listening. And so, I saw it, at least from an academic perspective, as being helpful to keep me on my toes, to make sure I'm always up to date on new cases and new things that would keep it timely. And so to me, it was helpful even just for my own education and almost like continuing legal education idea. And so I was happy to do it, but I didn't have any major dreams or aspirations. I just followed Tom into the breach here.
How about you, Matt?
Oh, so my podcasting history actually happens in 2 phases, and the little known first phase is all the way back in, I want to say 2009. I was editor of Compliance Week, and I decided to give this podcast idea, which was still quite new at the time, give it a shot. And all I did was ask people, random compliance experts, if they'd talk to me for 15 or 20 minutes. There was some online service I found that let me record the phone call, and I would get it as an MP3 file. And then I convinced my tech department at Compliance Week to create that SS feed, which to this day, I still don't know what that is. But that's what got it out on iTunes. And I did this in 2009 and 2010. Before all these other podcasts that I'm on now with Tom. But what struck me was at some point I ran out of time and I walked away from doing those podcasts at CW. And it was one of the very first times that readers actually called me up and said, no, you have to bring that back. I said, why? So that's what I listened to on my commute into the office. I said, really? That never actually occurred to me. But numerous people had said that, so I did bring it back for a little while. I think, again, by 2011 or so, I petered out with that. Then I didn't do anything, and then I left Compliance Week. I started Radical Compliance in 2016, and Tom started pestering me, why don't you get into podcasts? Well, because I still didn't know what an RSS feed was, and I didn't have any tech support then. So, Tom, if you want to do it, I'll be on it. And Tom would know for sure, but I think we started doing Compliance Into the Weeds like by March or April of 2016, and been doing it ever since. I think we've got a couple of 100 episodes in the can now, and that's been it. It's gone from there.
Man, it's in your blood. It's like you tried to get out, they kept pulling you back into this podcast game. How's it going, Michael? Good to see you.
Hey, how are you doing? Hey, good morning, everybody. Good afternoon.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about your foray into podcasting? How did you get into this game, and what has that journey been like for you?
What's interesting here, I heard Bill Maher calls podcasting, basically it's AM radio all over again, is podcasting. And I get it, but to me, it was a logical next step from blogging, from writing and blogging. And I was also struck by what Matt said. I had the same sort of reaction. People would say, oh yeah, I want to listen to your podcast while I'm driving to work. And I'm going, why? Listen to something else. There's other good music or something. The other thing that attracted me to podcasting was music and the ability to create your own intro song. So think whatever you feel like, whatever music you have. And I got a license to use the music, even though it wasn't for profit-making purposes, but just out of an abundance of caution. And so then it became fun to think of what song could I use today for the intro? Then I realized nobody really cares about the music. They just want you to get into whatever you want to talk about. They don't want to hear all the intro stuff. But I think to me, it's become, I think, what blogging was 15 years ago, 10, 15 years ago. And the way I ultimately got into blogging and to podcasting was, again, through Tom's influence, through seeing what Tom did, Matt, for sure, seeing what Matt was doing. Those things reinforce the idea of it's another way to connect with people. I mean, I used to use webinars for that sense, and I'm surprised how many people actually listen. I always am amazed at when I get download figures, I go, who are these people? And don't they have something better to do? And then
you are there better to do. That's you.
Well, what I realized in the compliance profession in general, that I think we're tapped into what is probably the most collaborative profession I've seen. If you get a bunch of lawyers together and tell them to collaborate, they'll never collaborate. If you get people in compliance to do it, they love collaborating. And I think we're tapping into something that is in the compliance profession, which is a helpful, positive attitude. And so that's why I think podcasting is just another way for us to talk to each other. So I look at it like that.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. How's it going, Michael? Good to see you. Looks like you're working on sound. When that's ready, let us know. We want to hear about your story coming in. But my next question is, what challenges did you face early on in podcasting, and what lessons shaped your approach? Because your podcast changes over time. Your anxiety for your first podcast is very different than it is for your 100th one. So how has that sort of evolved in your approach? Why don't we start? Let's start with you, Karen, and then I'll go to you, Matt.
As I was saying, I think I have a little bit of a different, I don't actually know about the audience, but definitely a different purpose. Like, for instance, today I have another sort of 3 or 4 podcasts that I'm going to do with my students. And I use it as a pedagogical tool. I use it for them to help think through how.
And for those of us who don't know what that word means, what do you mean?
Oh, sorry. Fair point. A teaching tool, something that helps them learn. And I used to always say, you learn the best when you can turn around and tell someone else. So it used to be my challenge to students, which is at Thanksgiving, when you can turn and tell whatever uncle or whatever aunt, whoever sitting there, what it is you've learned in your class. That's when you know it's stuck. That's when you know you can say, I've learned this thing. And so podcasting is a way for my students to do that. I mean, they're inevitably so nervous. They're always flipping out that it's recorded and what if they mess up. And so I think actually a little bit of the adrenaline for the presentation of it has been helpful to keep them on their toes. And then they're just so thrilled about having something at the end to say they can point to and they can send out to their friends and family. And so that has been, I think, the thing that I've found the most engaging and also just so rewarding, which I know is a different aim than most people on here. I'm not doing this necessarily for marketing reasons or anything else. And so that has been something that I have started to do and do more and more just in my classroom as one of the required assignments for the students. And so that's something I've really enjoyed. In terms of just the evolution, like I said, I followed Tom into this. I wasn't sure how casual or formal or any of that should be. And then I do think he did a lot of hand holding and having a lot of just interesting topics. He'd call up and be like, let's talk about this today. That's how we got into the Succession podcast, where we were just kind of fans of the show that had intersections with legal and a lot of other areas that we maybe should not have been wading into, like the fashion that they had chosen for the show. I mean, it went in any possible direction, but it just made it very accessible because it really was just a conversation with a friend. And that was something I think that made it very easy to get used to and to be happy I continued to do it.
I mean, to Michael's point, what I think attracts so many of us to this genre or this medium is the casual conversation. He called it AM radio. And I think your ability to capture that, I think, is what kind of keeps people coming back. It makes whatever topic you're talking about so much more accessible. And I love that I learned a new word today. Mike, I'd love to hear a little bit about your story coming into podcasting and just a little bit about how your approach has changed based on the lessons you've learned or how your vision for what this thing could be.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right, great. One thing I learned is to test your equipment because there's always
there
technical
you go.
difficulties.
It's an important lesson. Those are those fundamentals we got to get. Yeah.
No, I made a joke on LinkedIn this week that my very first podcast, I wasn't paying attention, didn't realize that the camera was on. So I just walk around my office like an idiot, swinging a baseball bat. And Tom claims that at one point I took my shirt off. I don't think that's true, but it proved me wrong. But for me, I remember coming into it and probably for my first several podcasts was way over prepared. I had my list of talking points and was, desperate to get them out, and you're shoehorning things in because trying to get them out. And one of the, I think, important lessons for me was you have to be prepared or the podcast content won't be good. But you also, the value to me of this format is that it is conversational. And so you go where the conversation takes you. And if you don't get any of your preset points out, then that's fine. And it's, I think what people like to listen to is it's not a speech, it's a conversation with folks. So that was an important lesson, I think, for me. And it took some time, honestly, to find that right balance between hitting my preset items I wanted to talk about and then just going with the flow of the conversation. And I think that's a balance that only you can really only strike with experience.
So Matt, how about you? How has your approach changed over time, and what lessons have you learned from those first couple you did back in your Compliance Week days to now this is a compliment, a major talking head in our space?
I agree with a lot of what people are saying, that I think it's more important to be listenable and engaging than to cover all of the talking points on the issue that you had in mind. And once upon a time, back, 14, 15 years ago, when I didn't really know what I was doing, I did have a somewhat heavily scripted approach to these podcast interviews I did. But over time, and especially once Tom and I started Compliance Into the Weeds, and it became just the two of us over and over again. And Tom, you and I have known each other now for the better part of 20 years, I think, that you know how to have a good conversation with people. And so it's much more about slow down all of the ambitions you have for this podcast. I typically try and cap them at about 20 minutes or so. If you have a longer commute time, you'll have to double up on episodes, I guess.
Or just play it slower. Yeah.
Or just play it slower. I'll slip into a Barry White sort of a voice. But take the time to dive in. And I do pay more attention to who would I actually want to have on, because they do need to be a listenable person. And I don't mean that they're very polished. It's more that they are engaged in the subject matter. If somebody is really excited about it, they're probably not going to talk like Barry White. They might be very fast and rapid talking and very excited. And honestly, Nick, that would be you, that you are engaged, but you're rapid fire. You're not the slow baritone like Barry White, but you're still listenable. Even so was he. So it's that sort of a thing. I mean, for other podcasts, I'm really fascinated by people who stretch them out for hours on end. Doesn't Joe Rogan do podcasts that could be 3 hours long? I mean, it's crazy how that works, but clearly it works. The guy's got 27 million followers, so he's doing something right. Howard Stern is another one that now he's become this brilliant interviewer, which I don't think anybody would have guessed when he was a shock jock 30 years ago, but here he is. And he is a master of how to bring people in and wander around to find a good point and just go with it when you stumble on it. And it's stuff like that makes for a good, listenable podcast. It's all about how engaged the person is with the subject. And then you just trust that you and the interviewee will be able to find something that's worth exploring.
Michael Volkov, why don't you share with us how how your expectations have changed or how your experiences have driven your podcasting from where it was to where it is today.
One thing I think we should also mention, and this is a little off topic from your question, Mark, but is the technology became easier, and the ability to take GarageBand and turn it into a podcast, or the ability to just click on something, record it, and even us neophytes in this area can map that through. I think what has changed a lot is common to what my brother Mike said, which is going in prepared versus going in and just knowing the issues and then having a conversation with someone. And I think what's interesting is I get more responses on my podcast to, there's some techno geeks who get into deep dive into an FCPA issue, and you'd be amazed how many people listen to that. Okay. But then on the other hand, most people I think want to hear a conversation and a simple conversation for 20 minutes. And what's really been interesting is when you bring on and you focus more on bringing on interesting people and just let them talk. It's not you talking. It's more just how do you bring the most that you can bring out of your guest to the listener, to the potential listener. And I think there's a lot of skill in, when you're a prosecutor, you learn how to do really good questioning. You go, what happened? What happened after that? And then after that happened, what happened? You really you have to step out of the way and let your guest speak more. And that's the real skill. Joe Rogan is not a great interviewer. Neither is Howard Stern. Matt Kelly is a great interviewer. Tom Fox coined the phrase, thanks for visiting with us. Okay. And everybody uses that now in podcasting. Not that Tom is the new Joe Rogan, but we don't need to do that to you, Tom. But I think it's evolved in the way that we've tried to focus more on what the listener wants to hear and be part of a conversation. And that's much more interesting than having Mike Volkov talk about, here's 10 great legal points and insights.
Yeah, I think that's right, because that's a lecture. You know what I'm saying? For you, go ahead.
No, you can do like a lecture. You can do anytime. We can stand in front and just do a training session by a bunch of lawyers. It's terrible. It's boring. So what I'm saying is here you have to start to think of what would you want to listen to? Who would you want to listen to? And I think also Matt hit a really important point. 20 minutes is really key. 20 minutes, no more than 20 minutes. Actually, who's the gentleman we all know, the Dodgers fan who's probably very happy, who does the SCCE podcast.
Adam Turtletop.
Yeah. Adam's are 8 to 10 minutes long.
You like that? You like a shorter one, huh?
I like Matt's rule of 20 minutes or less. And I think that's what people want. If you have a 45-minute commute, you just do 2 episodes of Matt, okay? But I think when you get to 30 or 45 minutes, they just have other stuff to do.
So let's talk about that. Would you agree with that, Mike? Let's get a little debate going here. I'm just kidding. What do you think about that, Mike? Do you have this kind of a hard, fast rule for what an appropriate time limit is? And I'd love to hear from you also, Karen.
So for me, I think it depends. I think for a lot of the topics we're talking about, which you could absolutely dive in and do a 2-hour podcast, it has to be a little bit different, right? It has to be very structured, I think, to do a podcast that's that long, where the listeners know where you are in the story and know where you're going in the story, right? It's almost like a movie, right? You have to have a beginning, middle, and end and have a good structure for it. If you're doing a type of podcast that is a conversation, we've got a topic we want to hit, we want to talk about, and just cut the conversation flow. I agree with the folks here that somewhere in the 18 to 25 minutes is the sweet spot, because I think that's as long as people want to listen to other people talk. So to me, personally, I listen to some podcasts that are 3 hours long. I'm able to, I never listen all the way through, right? It's listen for 30 minutes, come back and visit it later. But those are all very structured. So I think if you could put the time and effort into really structuring it and taking a deep dive, you can do those longer podcasts. For the ones we're talking about, the shorter is better.
Cool. Okay. How about you, Karen? I'm taking notes here because my podcasts clearly are not fitting you guys' mold. Maybe that's why you don't listen. Karen?
No, I'd agree with that. I think it does depend on the topic and the format. I mean, the one I'm on the most, I think, regularly is Everything Compliance, which is the whole panel of us. But we all talk for about 10 minutes or so on a different topic and then open it up for some discussion about that particular topic and then move on. And that way it maybe is actually a little bit on the shorter side in terms of by topic. But the full podcast is, I mean, usually over an hour. I'm looking at Matt and Tom on that to make sure, but easily more than an hour. But for my other ones, yeah, I think I would say maybe half an hour at the most. When my students, I tell them about 20 minutes, they will likely be on for. And so I think that is, like you said, like a manageable amount of time to sit and listen to someone, especially maybe in a one-on-one interview. But I agree with Mike and everyone else that it depends. I listen to some that I could listen to certain people for an hour and not even realize the time has gone by. So I think it can just depend.
So Matt, how do you think audience expectations have shifted in podcasting in general and in this space in particular? And have you received feedback from listeners that have influenced how you go about doing this?
It's always gratifying that I do occasionally receive feedback from listeners, and usually it's very positive, and they just like what Tom and I do. To a certain extent, we just keep doing what we're doing. I don't think Compliance Into the Weeds, we've done, Tom mentioned that we're coming up on 400 episodes sometime soon. So we've been doing it for almost 9 years now. It isn't broke, so we're not setting out to fix it. Audience expectations, that's actually an interesting question, because you could do what you wanted when I got into this in 2009, because I don't know that there were any other compliance podcasts at the time. I didn't quite know what I was doing. I'm not sure how many other people did. So you could give people, at least I thought, I could give them what seemed interesting to me, because that's all there was. Now there are, I don't want to say competition, that's not the word I mean, but there are many other podcasts out there, and they've become a primary source of how people generally consume their information. So I wouldn't say that they're demanding, but they're a better resource about what they want to hear. Tom and I these days make mention of listeners a lot more often, and I throw in lines when we're recording that, Tom and I don't know the answer to this. Anybody listening out there, if you do, please email us. I'd love to hear from you. Once or twice, once in a blue moon, they have, giving me some insight about whatever it was Tom and I were talking about. That's nice. The other thing that I struggle with, and I'd be curious how everybody else in the panel thinks about this, is the integration of audio and video. I don't necessarily love the video part of a podcast. I get it that we're on webinars all the time, and Nick, I'm on a webinar with you, and I get that's video, but I like just listening to podcasts. And one thing that's changed is a lot of podcasts now are audio visual. I like being able to look in different directions while I'm thinking out loud, looking up at the ceiling as I'm trying to pull together my thought. That probably looks pretty dumb captured on video, but it still lets you sound smart if it's just audio. So I go back and forth on how much I like the video recording of that while we're just having a conversation. And that's something that stuck with me. I don't know what the right or wrong answer is.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from the panel on that particular topic. I would say, as you guys think of your answer, I love the video part of it, because I listen to a lot of podcasts on YouTube. Just watching a screen with nothing on it seems like a little bit boring. And I think back to what Michael said earlier, it's about conversation, and it's the accessibility of it makes it, the casualness of it makes it so much more accessible. And I think there's an authenticity of that, right? Like something super scripted and you're looking around, and maybe that's crazy. If a new topic comes up, as Mike was saying, and that this conversation just goes where it goes, I think that's how we all kind of talk. That's how our brains work. But what do you think, Michael? Do you like the video piece? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I got a couple of thoughts on that. I think it's turning into like almost a talk show video type of thing. And I'm not saying that's bad. I think YouTube, by the way, is becoming the dominant outlet for podcasts. And now, does that mean you put up a screen and just talk behind it? Or do you have a nice studio setup like Nick has and go from there and have guests on there? I want to raise one other issue, and I'd love to hear this. I think that generally people do not like advertisements. And they like it in the beginning of the episode. They'll tolerate it at the beginning of an episode. But boy, do people hate if you ever put and I never
ad
did
read.
this.
Yeah.
An ad in the middle of your conversation and take a break. And
Stilted. I mean, it's crazy. Let me pause you and just do an ad read here. I just think that's bizarre.
Yeah. And I think if you have a top 10 in the world podcast, you can get away with that. In our case, I think the most that our listeners will tolerate is plugs in the beginning and then just move on and get it over with. But I also think that people are also getting more demanding in terms of when I turn the podcast on, I want to get into it right away. I want to hear, okay, I'm here to hear Matt and Tom talk about this FCPA action, hear Mike talk about this FCPA case, whatever. I don't want to go through 3 minutes of advertisement. This is what the world has turned into in terms of I want access to the information and the conversation now.
Yeah, let's get to it. You know what I mean?
Going to another area, I think there are going to be talk shows. I think it's going to be less advertising. And I don't know in the end, for compliance people, look, that's not the most important thing is the advertising. But the industry itself, I think, it's going to morph in some way. And I'm trying to figure out which way. That's the issue.
What would you add to this, Karen? And I'll come to you, Mike.
No, I agree, but I would say as a consumer, I'm not listening to podcasts on YouTube, so I'm happy. I usually am driving, so I'm happy to just listen. But as someone who is participating in podcasts, I agree with Matt that I always assume that it's not a video, and I've been caught red-handed a few times on Everything Compliance when I've walked in from the gym and don't realize it's a live performance. I didn't expect that. And so I do think I would definitely not enjoy podcasting and especially in Everything Compliance if we couldn't see each other on the screen. I mean, so it's true that the Zoom sort of quality of being able to talk to each other, I get how that might also play a role to listeners too, who also want to have that same experience, that they feel like they're in the room listening to this. I think it cuts both ways, but I would err on the side of Matt and saying, I'm happy to not be filmed every time.
Mike, anything to add there other than walking around without a shirt swinging a baseball bat?
Yeah, notwithstanding that story, I love the video. Love it. I think when I'm podcasting, I love it. I like seeing the people I'm talking to, being able to interact with nonverbal cues, whether it's a laugh or a kind of like an eye raise, that kind of thing. I think it's really useful. As a consumer, I've never watched a podcast. I only consume with headphones on the move. But I do think it's really useful. It's also a really useful promotional tool, whether you're putting shorts on Twitter or LinkedIn or whatever. People like to consume bits with video, I think. So I think it's useful in that regard.
So I was really excited and honored when Tom asked me to do this panel because I'm big fans of all you guys. And you four in particular have this knack of kind of balancing content that's engaging and being informative. So how do you do that? Is that intentional or are you guys just naturally phenomenal? Like, how do you balance that? And what feedback have you received from your audience that has maybe influenced how you lean one way or another? Let's start with Matt.
It's just a constant battle between me thinking I'm the most important person and I should talk and realizing that's bogus and I should just shut up and let somebody else talk. That's the challenge. I think a lot about it's important to be interested in the subject you're talking about. And there are occasional podcasts out there, I will name no names, and they're not necessarily even in compliance, but it's obvious that the host was paid to do a job and read a script. And if you told the host we're going to have a podcast about selling oranges, they would be just as happy to do that. If you told me to do a podcast about selling oranges, I would slam my head against the wall because that sounds incredibly boring and I wouldn't want to do it. The success.
What if somebody stole the oranges, Matt?
Then that's like a true crime thing mixed with agriculture, I guess. So maybe there's an audience for that. But it's more like you just have to care about the subject and care about the people and have a healthy sense of humility that I am not the smartest person on this. That's why I invited somebody onto this podcast, so they could be smarter than me about it. You want to be able to put some context there for your readers. Occasionally, you want to be able to call BS on something that a interview subject says and challenge them. And so it's an ongoing battle. But like I said earlier, that's what makes it listenable, is that you are enthusiastic about the subject. Even if you are still somewhat not the most elegant speaker, and sometimes I'm not, or sometimes you forget that you should shut up, and occasionally I do. You can overcome all of that, and you can learn to be a better interview subject. But to a great extent, the interest in the subject is innate. And if you have it and your guest has it, that's going to make for a successful conversation.
Yeah, I think that's so spot on. I think we are like today, our generation, we're like particularly attuned to authenticity. And if you're not actually engaged in it and you're not actually interested in it, I think that comes across. And if you are, I think that is attractive. What would you add to that, Michael?
I have a couple thoughts on some of the comments that were made. First, I think the most important thing is just to be yourself. And what do I mean by that? In other words, don't try to be something different than who you are. Like if you were in a meeting and talking to people, or you're on a telephone call or whatever, on a video conference or whatever, be yourself, bring your personality to the podcast and be comfortable with it. We used to have, when I was at the U.S. Attorney's Office for 25 years, we used to train prosecutors, and the thing that the juries wanted to see the most was just somebody who was comfortable in their own skin. They weren't trying to act like something. There was this one prosecutor, hair always disheveled, notes flying all over the place, seemed to be disorganized, but actually presented in an organized way. Juries loved him. Why? Because he was himself. He was authentic.
He seemed real,
He seemed real. The same thing that Matt's saying is really important. In other words, humility. I'm not God's gift to humanity. Okay, I'm passionate about this subject. We all are. We're all passionate advocates for compliance, for ethics, for integrity, and we love to talk about it, and we love to cite it. And I think that has to come across as well. The other point, I thought my brother Mike made a great point about using podcasting so we're lawyers and we want to try to get legal services, and we then use podcasting as a way to reach out and get to know people. And in terms of advertising in that sense, it's an incredible tool for that purpose. If you're a professional and trying to gain a step into an industry, into a profession, podcasting is where it is, because people then get to see what you're like and what you talk about and how you approach issues. And they learn to trust you, I think. And so, Mike, I think your point is really big about why podcasting. Look, 10 years ago, how many law firms had podcasts? 0. 20 years ago, how many had blogs? 0. I left a firm because the firm told me you can't have a blog. Okay, and I was using a blog. Tom remembers.
You didn't trust that RSS feed by the sound of it.
Yeah, I didn't. I had no idea what it was, and I still don't. But the point is that things have changed so rapidly, and there's so many uses to podcasting in particular, that I think Mike's point is really, that's a lot of what drives people getting into it, but they also have to be then authentic.
Karen, I think why people love you, among the many reasons, one is that you're very passionate and you're also very authentic. Is that just a natural way that you've engaged with this, or has that changed over time? What would you add to this conversation thread?
I would add a couple comments about the podcast that's really near and dear to my heart, which is the panel. And so in that way, because it's not necessarily a one-on-one interview, and so it's a group of people that have, for the most part, remained the same over the years, but there have been some additions or sometimes some subtractions here and there. But I might be speaking out of school, but I would theorize that a lot of the reasons people listen, well, one is because we're all real smart, we know what we're talking about. But two is it's like a family dinner at this point. These characters, exactly what Armstrong or one of these people are going to jump in and say, or you'll know the cadence of what they will say, how they'll say it. And there's something almost familiar about it that is actually, I think, in some ways very comforting. But you also there's still a lot of really great content. But there's some, I guess, for lack of a better word, notoriety to the people that I'm on there with, that I find that so enjoyable. And I hope our listeners do too, because it's a great cast of characters. And so it's like having a beer with some really great people every couple of weeks and chatting about what's going on in the world. And I think it's a great time.
I was struck by something when Michael was talking about authenticity, and it's like anybody in your life that is close with you and likes you, they like the real you. They don't like the fake you that you bring to an interview or to your first date or something like that. And so the easier it is for us to bring that true self, like Michael was saying, to these conversations, the easier it is to not only build trust with the person that you're talking to and have a better conversation, but probably the easier it is for people to engage. Has that been your experience, Michael? Or Mike, I mean? See, I'm getting you guys confused. It's two mics here.
Go ahead, Mike, brother. My brother, Mike. I call him my brother, Mike.
Yeah, I think Michael's point on this was really good. You have to be yourself. I'll add a caveat in that I think you have to be your engaging self. I'll go to a dinner party sometimes with my wife, and my wife will say, "Man, you were really on tonight. You were popping with questions and really engaging with everybody in the room." And there's other times when you're tired or you're maybe not into the crowd and you're just more reserved. You have to be your engaging self, because you, to Matt's initial point, you really have to be passionate. You can't fake that. And the audience needs to know you're passionate about what you're talking about. I think if you are passionate about what you're talking about and you find the subject matter really interesting, the audience will listen and they're engaged with that. And so we have a podcast here at the firm that Tom hosts and have different lawyers on occasionally. And this is often the feedback, especially after people's first time, that we'll give them is, listen, your content was great, but you were very reserved. I know how engaging you can be. You have to be your relaxed, engaging self.
Yeah, but it's hard, right? Because it's like it's a new medium. They're not comfortable in that. So how do you help deconstruct that? So here's a question. I have found in like podcasts that I do, it takes somebody like 15 minutes to loosen up a little bit. And so if it's only a 20-minute thing, then you only get a couple of minutes of that person. And I find that when their guard gets down and their authentic self comes out, the conversation is always so much better. You really start to see like how they're wired and how they see the world. And that's my favorite thing about podcasting, like hearing these different perspectives. Like everyone's looking at the world through like their own lens. So what strategies do you have to like supercharge that or to fast forward that? Is it a pre-call session where you're warming them up? Do you send them the questions beforehand? Like, how do you think about that? How do you get the most out of that 25 minutes or that 20 minutes that you're dialed in on?
Well, there are two things I think that are important to tell a guest. Number one is if you feel like you made a mistake or whatever, don't worry about it. Okay. Just don't worry about it. Just keep going. Okay. This is a conversation, and you tell them up front, we want this to be as informal as possible. Okay. Relax, take it easy. We don't need Michael was saying, a canned presentation or a wooden presentation. In that sense, we just want to have a conversation and relax. And once you do that, I think you break down the sort of old notion of, I got to be prepared. I got to have talking points. I got to anticipate every question. And no, because people want that authentic conversation. They don't want the canned presentation in that sense.
What would you add, Matt?
Beyond the obvious of you should encourage them to have a few drinks before they get on the air. So in fairness, I have never actually had a few drinks before podcasts, although once I was high on cold medicine and didn't know it when I did a podcast with one of the big four audit firms, but that was back then. Now, I do think that for example, I will send a podcast guest a couple of questions in advance, and just so they can gather their thoughts and have a sense of here's probably where we'll go. And I do tell them, here's some of the questions I'm likely to ask, but we may go in different directions, especially if you raise a good point and I have a follow-up or something. But this is only a rough roadmap, but it is a roadmap for them. And I don't think that's any big malpractice in journalism or anything like that, because if I'm just ambushing them and they're not prepared, that doesn't do anybody any favors. And it's not like we are trying to break state secrets or something like that, or have breaking news on a podcast about compliance. This is more about having a productive conversation so listeners can learn something. I think prep calls are good to have to get everybody else acquainted with each other. And it's a lot like webinars, frankly, and I'm sure many people who are listening right now have probably been on webinars and know how these things go. And a lot of times I'm struck by how much the prep calls almost feel like the speakers are trying each other out and trying their talk lines and making sure that I understand how this other person is going to be talking so I can respond to them this way, or I can feed off the energy in that way, and things like that. I think prep calls...
It's like watching your dog at a dog park in a way.
Yes, actually, yeah. I mean, otherwise, imagine just loosing your dog out on the wild. It would be a terrible experience for you and for the dog and everybody else. So there's a lot to that. I did just want to bring up one other point about authenticity that struck me, is that so long as you are authentic, I don't think it matters all that much about exactly who you are or how you're coming across. And Mike Volkov had mentioned the U.S. attorney who was rather disheveled, but yet that bonded with jurors because they got him. I can remember a couple of years ago, I was reading a biography of Winston Churchill, probably one of the best orators of the English language ever. And they talked a lot about how Winston Churchill had no problem using all sorts of obscure verbs and adjectives and whatnot and long, strong sentences because that's who he was. And if I started talking about how the stop sign isn't actually red, it's vermilion or something like that, people are like, why are you talking in a different way? Because that's not me. But it doesn't matter if you are fancy and highfalutin like Winston Churchill because that's who you are, or a bit disheveled because that's who you are, or you are any other sort of a person. So long as you are who you are and the thing is genuine, I am surprised at how much people can fairly quickly root out the genuineness of somebody they are observing, either through speaking or a visual or anything like that. But humans have a good nose for rooting out who's real and who's phony, and just don't do the phony.
I bet Churchill's pedagogical.
What'd you say?
I said I bet Churchill said pedagogical.
Well, no Churchill, okay? There's this saying like, it doesn't matter what you say, it's how you say it. But I think there's two more layers below that. It doesn't even matter. It's not what you say. It's not how you say it. It's like your intentionality actually is more important than what you say or how you say it. And what's even a layer below that is what you're talking about, Matt. It's like that self-image. If somebody has pure self-image, you can listen to them talk about whatever. And that guy that Michael was talking about, who's disheveled and messy and so forth, he clearly had a self-image and a comfortability in his own skin that like, people resonated with beyond what he was saying or how he was saying it. And you're right, Matt. We just have a way to sniff that out. And I don't know, it's on a subconscious level. You can just like sniff it out when somebody's really trying to be something that they're not. It's just such a turnoff in this era we're in of authenticity. What would you add to that? Just kidding. Tell me about some episodes as you go through your catalog. Many of you guys are on multiple different podcasts. What are some episodes or topics that have really gotten a lot of feedback from the audience? Does anything come to mind? We'll start with you, Karen.
I mean, I think there were a few episodes of our Succession podcast, which I wouldn't actually take any credit for. I think the show was so great that Tom and I would usually have a very robust, sort of excited conversation about some of the best television ever produced at that time. And so I think there were people that really connected to what we were talking about. And that was even outside of the compliance era. It was a little bit more fun, but law adjacent still. And then I think there definitely have been some fantastic shout outs and rants on our Everything Compliance podcast that sometimes feel like they are out of left field. But to your point about getting to know these people a little better that are your fellow podcasters, those things, those shout outs and rants, you have no idea what's going to come out of anyone's mouth. And so you start to really see some of their authentic self. And I think that's some of the charm of that particular podcast as well.
How about you, Mike?
One thing I noticed, if you
who's
have
Mike and who's Michael? Just
Brother Mike, you go first.
No, I'm sorry, I jumped in, but I was just gonna. Yeah, I think there's been a couple of episodes that I can't even remember if it was on All Things Investigations or the FCPA compliance report that Tom and I have done, where I could tell in the moment this is pretty good. We both were really enthusiastic and energetic about the topic, and probably went a little longer than we should have. And I think anytime I get feedback at all, I get a smile on my face, like at least somebody's listening type deal, and it's great. But there's been a couple of episodes where afterwards I've gotten an email from somebody that says, it might be somebody I know, listen to the podcast, you guys were really on it today or whatever. And I got to tell you, it's worth doing it just for that type of feedback, because podcasting is fun to do. I think from my perspective. To Michael's point, it's a good promotional tool so people can get to know me and potentially hire me. But knowing that somebody is listening and enjoying it is a huge benefit.
That's great. How about you, Michael?
So I've just three quick ones. One is I've been surprised. I'm overseas for some reason, I'm at a law firm working on something over there, and then somebody comes up and says, by the way, I love your podcast. I listen to it. And you go, what? Over here? You're listening to this? It's pretty engaging in that sense, because I think podcasting has brought together lots and lots of parts of the world together in terms of interested people in compliance, which is, I think, great. Number two, if you mention cryptocurrency or have an episode anytime about cryptocurrency, your downloads will triple, because there's just this community out there for that episode, and they just want to talk about crypto. They're just people who are into crypto like you wouldn't believe. So when we will do, let's say, a review of an enforcement action relating to crypto, boom, numbers go way, way up. The other popular area continues to be in compliance is FCPA. Believe it or not, even though we're not getting, this hasn't been the most active last few years in the area, people are just really interested in it. And it's a topic you can get lost in for a long time. And frankly, it's generated, and it's perhaps one of the most significant influences in improving the compliance profession. And because the FCPA was tied to that, in a sense, bringing compliance into another generation, I think you get more interested people into the intricacies and some of the issues that can come up, and it makes it interesting. And then when you throw in your opinion, like when you get a little bit frustrated or angry about the Goldman Sachs 1MDB case, that just irritates you. That people are
You get passionate about that case, yeah.
I mean, these people need to go to jail, and it's just so brazen, and you feel it, and you communicate that. People respond to that too. Okay, and then you get more feedback. People will say, I agree with you totally. The other, and I think that should come through, because that's how I authentically felt about that case. And so I thought those are all, but just avoid crypto episodes.
Or double down on it. It sounds like I should start a crypto podcast. I thought you were going to say the Diddy list. So let's go ahead. What? So we have 2 more minutes. I want to do a quick around the world. And for somebody who's maybe thinking about starting a podcast, what is your biggest piece of advice for them? Let's start with you, Matt.
Oh boy. Figure out what you are passionate about to discuss. And that's all. The technology part can be solved. Getting good guests can be solved. How you gather listeners and figure out what you want to talk about, that can all be solved because you are honestly just passionate about the subject. And if you are, then you're going to want to solve all these other problems, and things will get easier for you. And you're going to find other people who also want to talk about it, whatever the it is. If you're both passionate about it, then there's probably 3 or 4 other people at least who will also listen, and then you go from there. That's all there is to it.
Awesome. How about you, Karen?
Hard to follow. I was just going to say, just do it. All of the hurdles that you might think are there, as Matt pointed out, maybe technology or production or how you actually get from A to B, that can fall into place. But I agree. Just start calling people, getting on a Zoom and start talking to them, and hit record and just see. I think you'll be surprised how many people are interested in just listening in.
Yeah. How bad is it going to go? What would you add, Mike?
I don't have much. Okay. There we go, Mike or Michael. Hey, Mike, what do you have to add? Let me add that.
I was going to add to Matt's point. I think make sure you're knowledgeable about the topic as well, because I think that just helps when you're talking. It gives you confidence to do it, and then just do it. Big secret for me, I would podcast if nobody listened. It's just fun, and it's fun to talk about topics, and it's fun to learn about new things so you can talk about them. And so, to Karen's point, just do it.
All right, Michael, bring us home.
I was going to say, not only do it, don't get intimidated by when you're just starting and you think, oh, I can never do this, or it's too much work, it's this and that. It's actually not as much work once you get a rhythm down to it. And once you put in place certain things, you can do the technology, you have your passionate subject, you have friends who want to talk to you about it, but then You can manage it to a point where it doesn't take too many hours of your week, and then there's a consistency to your schedule. Keep the episodes going. Don't take weeks off. It's like blogging in this sense that blogs, the more fresh content you have, the better. Same thing with podcasting. Episode a week is whatever your rhythm is going to be. Tell people what it is and then stick with it.
This was a phenomenal session. Thank you guys so much for being so generous with your time and so generous, as always, with your advice. Matt, why don't you drive us home with one more word to wrap us up?
Oh, good Lord. In that case, listen to Compliance Into the Weeds, of course, and tell us what you want to do. But this has been great. And it's a fun exercise, like so many other people have said. Just start doing it if that's what you want to do.
I love it. I love it. This is a lot of fun. Hope you guys all, if you haven't been following these guys or listening to their podcast, you got a little taste of what you can expect. Thank you guys so much. We're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to be here for the big award show for the Great Women in Compliance OGs here. Lisa Fine looks like she's here. Looks like Mary Shirley is here. So we're going to take a quick break, go get another coffee, go to the washroom, and we'll be back in about 5 minutes. See you guys soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nick.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes.
Okay, good.
How's it going, guys?
Can you guys see me? Because I see the three of you.
Yes. I'd put your camera down a hair.
Like this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
You can hear me now?
I do.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Oh,
What
okay.
is Nick, what is the thing spinning around in front of you?
This is my red swinging sticks.
Oh, is that new?
It is new. Yeah.
Okay.
I have a silver one, but I got a special red one just for the Agora Awards.
Really? No.
Yeah.
Mary, your video is
Terrible.
really blurry.
Oh, blurry.
No, she just rubbed a little Vaseline on there, so she got that.
Gotta
It's
go up.
lights behind me, and I'm in just.
Right.
But is it actually pixelated? Or
No, your face is fine, but it's very bright behind you.
You look angelic in a way. Yeah, she looks
I mean,
angelic.
because
Keep it.
it's true. In my California apartment, I've really outgrown it, and so there's just not really any space for me to sit anywhere else. So hopefully, this will change when I get a McMansion apartment in Tennessee.
All right. Nick will introduce us at the top of the hour. Then I will have my remarks, and then we'll go to
And
you
I have it
guys.
here.
Oh, there it is.
Oh, yep,
Yes.
samesies. It's so nice, Tom.
It's beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow.
Well,
That is
It's going
great.
to be. It's going to be in that point of. Sorry, it's backwards of me here. So that point of. It'll be right there after this event, but
Ooh.
I didn't want to unveil it before that.
Well, that is very cool. Wow. It's even better than I never saw it other than a picture. So
It's very nice.
hopefully they spelled your names right.
That it is correct.
They did. I
They-
checked
they
right
cut-
away.
New Zealand has cut off the world map a little bit, but
Oh my
that's
gosh.
standard for us.
What a slap in the face. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're
Well,
right. They did do that to New Zealand, but Australia seemed to be okay. So your rivals survived.
I know, as per usual.
Guys, I cannot tell you how excited I am to do this for you all. You guys have meant more to me than you'll ever know. And I am so thrilled with what you created and what you're still doing. I cannot crow about you all enough. So
That's so sweet.
if you're going to blush, just get ready because I'm going to hit every highlight
All right.
I can think of.
Nice. Are we starting right now? Because the dog just woke up. I want to give him a treat. Do I have
Give him
one
a
second?
little treat, and then we'll get started.
Okay. Give me
This
one
is your
second so
day.
yeah, I know.
You're the
but
star
of
here.
course,
You're the
he's been
talent,
asleep
so.
for the last hour. Okay. Hold on, buddy. Let's just give you one thing to keep it quiet.
All right. Should we get started? Just kidding.
That was great, Nick. You really did well.
Oh, good. Yeah, it was a fun group.
Sounded like you were having fun.
Jonathan
I'll tell you what, I
Armstrong's
learned a
session go
lot.
well? Oh, good.
That?
Did Jonathan
back.
Armstrong's session go well?
Yeah, it was great.
Yes.
They've all been great. All right, let's jump in here, okay?
All right.
How's Rocky? Rocky's good to go now?
He is. Sent him on an extra walk this morning. He got home an hour ago and has been out cold until he heard all you guys, and now he wants to be a part of it.